My name is Elise Parker, and I still remember the sky that day, overcast, cool, for late May. I was 12. We had just finished what I thought was a family trip. We pulled up to the Houston bus station. My parents told me to get out and wait for them. I did. Then, they rolled down the car window and laughed. "Let's see how you figure it out now." They drove off. I stood there, no phone, no wallet, just a backpack, just me. That was the day my childhood ended. A woman named Rachel from station security found me nearly an hour later. I must have looked like a ghost, knees pulled to my chest, staring at nothing. When she asked what happened, I couldn't explain much. Just my name. That I'd been on a trip. That my parents were gone. Child Protective Services stepped in. That night, I slept on a thin mattress under buzzing fluorescent lights. Everything smelled like bleach and paper towels. No bedtime stories. No goodnight hugs. Just silence and strangers. I kept waiting for a call, a visit, even a letter, but nothing came. The days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I was shuffled between homes, some decent, some cold, some where I didn't unpack my bag. At school, I kept to myself. Kids didn't know what to make of me, the quiet girl who never had visitors. I stopped raising my hand, stopped trusting smiles. I stopped hoping. Because hope, when unanswered, starts to feel like a trap. I was 12 and utterly alone. A woman named Rachel, part of the station security team, found me almost an hour later. I must have looked like a ghost, knees pulled tight to my chest, staring into nothing. When she asked what had happened, I couldn't say much. Just my name, that I'd been on a trip, that my parents were gone. Child Protective Services stepped in. That night, I slept on a thin mattress under flickering fluorescent lights. Everything smelled like bleach and paper towels. No bedtime stories. No goodnight hugs. Just silence and strangers. I kept waiting for a phone call, a visit, even a letter. But nothing ever came. The days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. I was moved from one foster home to another. Some were okay. Some were cold. In some, I didn't even bother unpacking my bag. At school, I kept to myself. The other kids didn't quite know what to make of me, the quiet girl no one ever came to pick up. I stopped raising my hand. I stopped trusting smiles. I stopped hoping. Because hope, when unanswered, becomes a trap. I was only 12. And completely alone. And then, they came. James and Lena Adams. They weren't flashy. They didn't make grand promises. They arrived like a quiet Sunday afternoon, steady, unassuming, and calm. Lena smelled like lavender and warm bread. Her voice had the kind of softness that wrapped around you like a worn quilt. James was more reserved. When he did speak, it was with purpose, and when he laughed, it rumbled from deep in his chest, like a distant train moving slowly through the night. The first time I met them, I didn't believe any of it. I'd seen kindness before, but it always faded. But James and Lena, they didn't try to convince me. They simply showed up. That first night, they brought me to a small room with blue walls and soft yellow light. On the pillow, there was a folded note. It read, "You're safe here. We're not in a hurry. Rest well." No probing questions. No expectations. Just space and silence that didn't feel dangerous. The second night, while I was drying dishes, Lena gently asked, "What do you need to feel safe here?" I froze. No one had ever asked me that. I didn't know how to answer. But she didn't push. She didn't fill the silence. She just continued rinsing a plate, patient, present. Weeks passed. One day, I noticed James in the garage, building something. A few days later, he brought a small wooden bookshelf into my room. "I saw you always carrying library books," he said with a quiet smile. "So I figured, books need a home too." He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't linger. He just left it there like a small offering. I started painting in therapy-shy strokes, barely touching the canvas. One of my early pieces was abstract, messy, a swirl of dark greens and grays. I hid it in my drawer. Lena found it. The next morning, it was framed, and hanging in the hallway. No words, just her quiet acknowledgement. I see you. I began painting more. First in corners, then across larger pages. One Saturday, James took me to a local art store. He didn't rush me. Pick whatever colors make you feel something, he said. I chose midnight blue, the color I'd always imagined hope might be. They never asked me to forget the past. They didn't say, everything will be okay. They didn't try to replace anything. Instead, they laid down stones slowly, gently, so I could build a path forward at my own pace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just being cared for. I was being chosen. Not as a case file, not as a burden, but as a human being with value, with voice, with a future. By the time I turned 18, I had done something many might not understand. I legally changed my name from Elise Parker to Elise Adams, not because I wanted to erase the past, but because I no longer wanted to carry it like a name tag sewn into my skin. Parker was never a name I chose. It was a weight I was born into. But Adams was the name I earned. The name of safety, of second chances, of real love. I got a scholarship full ride to a small but prestigious design school in Denver. The acceptance letter felt unreal, like someone had mistaken me for someone braver, smarter, more whole. I almost didn't go. The idea of leaving home again sent ice through my chest. I had spent years rebuilding myself from the ground up, and now I was expected to leave everything stable again. But Lena, she didn't pressure me. She just asked, gently, one evening while folding laundry, "Are you afraid to leave or afraid you'll be left again?" I couldn't answer her. Not fully, but I knew what she meant. So I went. Not because I was fearless, but because this time, the leaving was my choice. The morning I left, Lena packed a small tote bag. Inside were snacks, a scarf she had knitted herself, and a note sealed. She told me not to read it until I got there. On the plane, I opened it. The handwriting was soft, slanted, familiar. It said, "Elise, you've already survived more than most people face in a lifetime. That means you can thrive. You don't owe anyone your pain anymore. We're always here. Love, Mom." She signed it, Mom. I read it 3 times, and then I cried. Not the kind of cry that comes from sadness, but the kind that comes when you realize you've finally been chosen and loved without needing to earn it. Denver was cold. The apartment I shared with 2 other girls was tiny and drafty, with radiators that made loud popping noises at night. But it was mine. I worked nights at a local bookstore, stacked shelves, and spent breaks sketching on the back of receipts. I painted early in the morning, when the city was still quiet, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with tears, but always with something to say. And that's when I met Noah. He came into the bookstore one rainy night, looking for a poetry book. He didn't ask about my past, didn't try to fix me. He just listened when I was ready to speak. He made space for my silence. And unlike so many before him, he didn't fear it. He wasn't loud love. He was steady, gentle, warm like sunlight through curtains. One night, while we were sitting on the floor, surrounded by half-finished paintings and cold takeout, he looked at me and said, "You know you don't have to be alone anymore, right?" When he proposed, I didn't cry out of shock. I cried because it was the first time someone had chosen me, not because of need, but because of love. We started a small design studio together. Not glamorous, but meaningful. We worked with nonprofits, with local schools, with youth shelters. We painted walls. We designed children's books. We made art that healed, not sold. My past didn't vanish, but it stopped being the loudest thing in the room. The Parkers, my biological parents, they faded into a name I used to write on forms, a story I once carried in secret. Now, They were just chapter 1 in a much bigger, more beautiful book. Because this life, the one I had built with calloused hands and a cracked heart, it was mine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I was 32. That morning began like any other, a warm cup of coffee on the table, soft sunlight spilling through the windows, and our dog curled up by my feet. I was reviewing sketches for a community project, feeling calm, grounded. Then my phone started buzzing. Once, twice, then again, and again. 29 missed calls, all from the same number in Tennessee. I didn't recognize it, but my body did. There was a voicemail. I hit play. Dad had a stroke. Mom wants to see you before it's too late. It was Kyle, my brother, the one who hadn't spoken a word to me since the day I disappeared from our lives. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry. Just clinical, detached words. As if this were any other family emergency. I sat there, motionless, phone in hand, eyes fixed on the wooden floor like it could somehow hold me up. No tears, no trembling. Just silence, heavy and familiar. Noah walked in. He looked at me for a moment, said nothing, then gently placed a hand on my back. You don't have to go, he whispered. But if there's still a part of you carrying that weight, maybe it's time to set it down. That night, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky shifted slowly from orange to deep blue. I stood there for a long time, not thinking, not deciding, just feeling. I thought about Lena and James, about the letter she gave me before I left for Denver, about all the people who had shown up for me, without obligation, without blood ties. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel hate. I just felt unfinished. Not because I needed them, but because I needed closure. So I booked the ticket. Not for them, but for me. The hospital smelled like bleach and silence. Everything felt sterile, the air, the walls, even the way the nurses avoided eye contact. My dad looked smaller than I remembered, pale, sunken into the sheets like he was disappearing by the minute. Tubes, machines, beeping monitors surrounded him. My mother stood beside the bed, arms crossed, posture perfect, as if holding up the last bits of control she had left. When she saw me, her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, more like a flinch. You came, she said. Not a greeting, not a question, more like a statement she expected me to confirm. I stood there, still holding my coat. The weight of the past clung to it. I'm not here for you, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled slightly. I came to speak my truth. I sat in the plastic chair at the corner of the room and looked at the man in the bed, this man who once drove away from his daughter without looking back. I told them everything. About the fear, the shame, the night terrors that lasted for years, the therapists, the trust I had to relearn, the people who showed me kindness when they didn't have to. I told them about the Adamses, about James building me a bookshelf, about Lena's note on my pillow. I told them I had a life now, full, rich, and beautiful, and that it had nothing to do with them. You taught me how to survive, I said, but not in the way you think. You showed me what I never want to be, and I used that to build a life without you. They didn't cry. They didn't apologize. They didn't even argue. And that was maybe the truest moment between us. I stood, placed my coat back over my shoulders, and looked at them one last time. Goodbye, I said, not out of hate, but because I no longer owe you my silence. Then I walked away, and for the first time in decades, I felt light. Back in Denver, I hugged Noah tighter. That first night home, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the dark ceiling, and breathed for what felt like the first time in days. The next morning, I mailed a letter to the Adamses, not just to thank you, but a story. I told them what had happened, what I had said, and that I finally felt free. Lena called later that week. She didn't say much, just, I'm proud of you, We both are. That meant everything. I poured myself back into my work, but something had shifted. I no longer needed to prove anything, not to them, not even to myself. I began focusing more on mentoring girls, aging out of the system, girls like me. I started an art program too. We call it Second Light, because sometimes the first light we're given isn't enough, but there's always another one if someone holds it up for you. We don't just paint. We talk about fear, about rage, about shame, and about hope. Real hope, the kind you build, not the kind you wait for. Some of the girls remind me of myself. Quiet, guarded, and slowly they open up, stroke by stroke, word by word. This is the family I've built, one that holds space, even for silence. And every now and then, when the sun hits just right through the windows of our studio, I see my reflection in the glass, and I smile. Because I know exactly who I am, and I wouldn't trade this life for the one I lost. Maybe someone left you behind too. Maybe they called it tough love. Or maybe they just didn't know how to love at all. If that's you, I want you to hear this. It wasn't your fault. The way someone treated you doesn't define what you deserve. You don't need their permission to rebuild. You don't need their apology to grow. Because healing isn't something they give you, it's something you claim. You're still here. You've survived every version of hard that's ever tried to break you. And that means you can still begin again. And this time, you get to choose what to keep, what to let go, and who gets to walk beside you. So if this story stirred something inside you, share your own below. Your truth could be the light someone else needs. Leave a comment, we read every one. 7. End of teen. Subscribe for more stories like this, raw, real, and healing. Because the past may shape us, but it never has to define us.